14 of the fantasy football season, and he has a few running backs I will bench this week. The first guy, James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Robinson here, we saw him not have a great game in Week 13, and he's been banged up as well. Is Robinson on and off over the last few weeks? So the last few weeks for him, Week 11 versus San Francisco, 12 carries, 29 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 9 yards. Week 12 versus Atlanta in a plus matchup, he had a mediocre game. 17 carries, 86 yards in that one with 3 catches, 29 yards, and a fumble loss. And then Week 13 at the Rams, total shutdown for him, 8 carries, 24 yards, a catch, 11 yards, and a fumble loss. So Week 14, another tough matchup for Robinson at the Tennessee Titans that give up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to running backs. And right here, with a crucial week here in Week 14, I just can't trust them unless you have no other options. And if you do put them in your lineup, just don't expect much from him. So James Robinson, I would bench this week if you could. The second running back's Jamaal Williams of the Detroit Lions. So there's a chance DeAndre Swift could come back from his injury this week here in Week 14. But I don't know. But either way, I don't like the matchup at all at the Denver Broncos. We've seen this Bronco defense versus weaker teams play real good football. And we even saw early in the year them go into Dallas and shut that offense down, especially in Dallas, which is a big time move by that defense. But anyway, the last few weeks here for Jamaal Williams. Week 11 at the Browns, 7 carries, 11 yards. Week versus the Bears, 15 carries, 65 yards, 5 catches, 18 yards. And then last week versus Minnesota, who's not that great of a defense, he had a mediocre game, 17 carries, 71 yards, and a catch for 9 yards. So Williams here, obviously he was better with the Green Bay Packers, but with the tough matchup this week, Jared Goff not a good quarterback, and the Lions on the road, it don't spell to me like it's going to be a good game for Williams. So I would bench him this week. The next running back we're staying in the same game is Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos. So I know Gordon returned to practice with a hip injury, but after the performance we saw last week with Javonte Williams being the main man and the bell cow running back at the Kansas City Chiefs for this Bronco team, I think we could see Gordon's workload definitely cut down in the last few weeks before he was out last week. Just mediocre games with touchdowns saving his day. Week 10 versus Philly for Melvin in that one. 9 carries, 45 yards, a touchdown, a catch, -2 yards, and a fumble loss. And Week 12 versus the Chargers, 17 carries, 83 yards, and a catch for 5 yards. So last week he didn't play. And right here, I know the Lions give up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, but I think this is a Javonte Williams 70 to 30% out touch of Melvin Gordon. And I would bench him this week. The next running back's Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. So another situation just like Melvin Gordon. We saw last week Sony Michel impress the coaching staff and Sean McVay for the Rams. And Henderson, he was active in that ball game, but he didn't get touches in that one last week here. So the last few games here for Henderson. Week 9 versus Tennessee, 11 carries, 55 yards, 3 catches, 3 yards. Week 12 at San Francisco, 5 carries, 31 yards, 4 catches, 10 yards. And Week 12 at Green Bay, he had a good ball game in that one. 16 carries, 55 yards, 4 catches, 18 yards, and a touchdown. But right here, with Sony Michel now more in the mix than ever for this backfield, McVay likes to change the pace, and him running between the tackles, we could see Henderson and Michel going for a 50-50 split. And with a pretty tough matchup on paper at Arizona that gives up the 17th least amount of fantasy points to running backs, I just don't like it here, especially if it's going to be a split and Sony Michel definitely going to be a factor in that backfield. And the 5th and final running back I will bench this week, David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. So Justin Fields is going to be back in the lineup this week, and it's a tough matchup at the Packers that give up the 12th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. I know last week I wasn't a fan of Montgomery, but he proved me wrong, no doubt about it, last week with a huge ball game versus Arizona. 21 carries, 90 yards, a touchdown, and 8 catches for 51 yards. But right here on Sunday Night Football, I think this Green Bay team, their number one concern is going to stop Montgomery and try to make Justin Fields beat him in this game. So the last few games before last week, Montgomery didn't do much. Week 11 versus Baltimore, 14 carries, 58 yards, a catch for 9 yards. And Week 12 at Detroit, in that one, 17 carries, 46 yards, 3 catches, 28 yards. So right here, tough matchup at Green Bay. Fields is back, where also Fields could steal goal line touches from Montgomery with his running ability and I just don't like the matchup. Even though I know I didn't like it last week, I think this week here, Montgomery doesn't have a bigger game than 15 fantasy points maybe this week, so that's a few running backs I will bench for week 14 of the fantasy football season.